Alrighty, here we are, Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, second part of our Lord of the Rings series podcasts. So last episode we talked about the Fellowship of the Ring, and we kind of talked about the other two films as well,
Yeah.
two books as well.
Just all of it.
Had some really interesting questions that we answered for each other, and just kind of discussed what we liked about films and the books and why it was such a magical experience viewing and reading them.
Yeah. And not just magical, but also realistic, which is part of the magic of it, because it was so real.
Yeah, and exactly, beautifully executed, well acted, the special effects, the amount of planning, and like the crazy budget that they had for the first film alone.
And the themes and how the dialogue just moved everything forward from a very exposition-heavy book that Fellowship of the Ring is. And I think all three of them are, because Tolkien's just like that.
So, just a brief synopsis. Book and film are kind of similar because at this point the Fellowship has been broken up. Boromir has died, Merry and Pippin have been captured by the Uruk-hai, and...
Boo-hoo.
Yeah, I know. Sean Bean has a gruesome death, as he has in almost every movie that he's ever in, and in Game of Thrones as well. I'm never going to get over the fact that Ned Stark is killed.
Yeah, spoiler alert, guys, but...
Yeah. Well, if you're not past season 1, tough shit.
Yeah, honestly. Get with it, guys.
You have a lot of pain and suffering to go through. Yeah. Yeah, so the Fellowship's been broken up. So Frodo and Sam go off on their lonesome. Gandalf is presumed to be dead up until... I don't know, like
a third in the film.
Yeah, and pretty deep into the book as well.
Yeah.
Really interesting thing when he comes back, and
yeah, they think he's Saruman, which is interesting.
Yeah, for a split second, it turns out nope. Even though they had Christopher Lee's voice in the films, you're like,
they're so deceptive.
That's fucking Saruman right there.
Yeah, I remember when I was like 6 or 7 years old, I was listening to that like weird drum sound when Pippin and Merry were thrown right in front of the White Wizard. And I remember like gasping like one of those little hobbits in the first film, like, it's Saruman.
Oh my god, it's so cute.
I know. And my brothers just laughed at me. They're like 10 years older, so they were like, it's not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was so smart, but it wasn't actually Saruman. It was Gandalf.
Yeah, I know. And so Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas are on their own as well, and they're in pursuit of Merry and Pippin, who've been captured, and I think at that point they kind of understand the gravity of what's happened, because they understand Frodo and Sam are having to go on their lonesome to avoid being in this big party of people, and plus Frodo doesn't really trust anybody anymore except Sam is stubborn enough to go with him, and that kind of thing. So Merry and Pippin get rescued, sort of, because they escape. Yeah, well, it's not really a rescue, but they escape.
Yeah, rescued by Gandalf.
Yeah. And they meet Treebeard, which is, in the book, one of my favorite scenes or chapters to read is when they encounter Treebeard. There's such a fantastical just eclipse moment right there. Like, it's just so well written. And Treebeard in the book is a little bit more interesting, I think, than in the film. That's one criticism that I have. I think that there's a lot more sense of depth of character that you get.
Yeah.
And they're with Treebeard, and they're like, this dude takes fucking forever to say stuff. And, they have the Entmoot, and nothing really gets said. But,
I think what's interesting is that a lot of the history is kind of left out of the Ent people in the films.
Yeah.
Like, they do have the Entwives mentioned in the extended version, and how they're lost, but there's not really that much depth into their songs and their like culture and their relationship with nature and the other non-speaking trees, because they're not exactly trees. They're like magic, like glorified trees. And I think because Tolkien is such a like environmentalist, he's kind of put a lot of emphasis into the Ent sort of aspect of the Two Towers. But here, there's just not enough time in the films to really get into that.
And additionally, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are trifecta. They make it all the way to Edoras, and they link up with King Theoden, and they're like, whoa, this dude's fucked up. What's going on here? There's some chicanery at play, and then they meet Wormtongue, who's just like slimy and disgusting. And by that time, Theoden is uncorrupted. He's back to being his normal self. The Battle of Helm's Deep happens. Very epic. Very awesome. The Uruk-hai army is utterly routed and destroyed. Saruman is humiliated. Isengard is overrun. Merry and Pippin reunite with Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Gandalf.
Yippee!
Hooray.
And they're all like, what the fuck? We've been like running after you for like 10,000 years. And now you're sitting here eating salted pork and smoking weed and like, what? Give me some of that.
Yeah, they've been along. And of course, all the while, Sam and Frodo are traipsing through the mountains of New Zealand, even in the book. Like, actually, it's New Zealand pretty much. It's rocky, middle of nowhere. They go through the dead marshes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's actually a really interesting scene. Because, we're going to talk a little bit later about World War II.
Yes.
But this is perhaps the most direct allegory to the horror and carnage of the First World War, with thousands of people laying face up in mud and underwater in this sodden, disgusting mess of an environment, which is the dead marshes, where in the actual world of Middle-earth, many battles have been fought.
Yeah. Thought and fought.
I guess so. Eventually, they reach the point of Ithilien in the realm of Gondor. They establish contact with Faramir, kind of unexpectedly, what have you. And that's kind of like that's pretty much like how it's wrapped up.
Yeah.
And
Sam talks about stories. What are we holding on to, Sam? What's left good in this world, Mr. Frodo? Something like that.
Yeah, they get all philosophic.
Yes.
And, of course, this is when the journey is getting extremely arduous and it's taxing. And of course, there's been loss of life. And Frodo and Sam think Gandalf is dead. Like, they still think that he's dead, and they have no idea what the fates are of their fellows. So it's a really interesting kind of book overall, because, like I said, it's a middle child. It's this transition piece between they're setting out for the adventure, and there's the big kind of clash and action of Moria, and then Gandalf supposedly dies. And Boromir dies, and then it's like, okay, now we have to split up, and this is when the mission begins. And then there's in the Two Towers, you get this new kind of rising action point that's happening. So there's a big battle, and Saruman's defeated, but towards the end of the book, at least, and in the film as well, you get the sense too, they're really gearing up for a giant conflict. On a scale that's been like rarely matched in the history of Middle Earth, harkening back to the days of when Morgoth and the Elven realms were fighting.
Yeah.
A huge conflict, and no one really fully understands that yet, but it's definitely building up, and I think the characters little by little begin to realize that. And so yeah.
There's no going back. I think that's actually a line. Like, Frodo begins to understand that there is no going back. And I think that's Galadriel saying that.
Yeah. No, there totally isn't, or else it makes you look like a giant coward.
Yeah.
We're counting on you, dude.
Yeah.
You got to reach the end zone with that football.
Yeah, well, Gollum kind of does it, scores it for him, but we'll get into him later.
Gollum. So we're going to kick it off, and so the guiding question, or thesis or something, hypothesis, I guess, because
well, it's a question, so it's not a hypothesis.
Yeah. So for this film and book, Two Towers, question is Saruman like literally Hitler? Now, the reason why that we asked that question is because obviously the author J.R.R. Tolkien lived through Second World War. I'm pretty sure we've mentioned this before, and he actually fought in the first one. And even though it was well established that he hated Allegory,
so connecting to disparate but similar sort of events to see how they connect historically.
Yeah, so he didn't like that, and that's why he probably would have objected to this question entirely.
Yeah.
But at least the way, the way it looks in the film, it does look like Saruman has a lot of the qualities that Adolf Hitler had in terms of being very charismatic and like a
influential.
Like his ability, like with speech, is really the key thing there.
Yes.
And of course, there's the clip where it's such a great clip because Wormtongue is just babbling away. And then they walk out this little door onto like this little, Juliet balcony. And then, brr, brr, a fucking army of like 10,000 Uruk-hai just screaming. And he sheds like a little tear because he's just like in awe.
Yeah, poor Wormtongue. He's such a wretch.
It's like, what have I got myself into?
Yeah. That exact soft-spoken voice.
Yeah. Really soft individual on the inside.
He just wants to open a can of soup. Sorry, inside joke.
Yeah, inside joke. Okay.
Yeah. But you could definitely see how Peter Jackson and the team's influence really brings out different points of characters in the films, because there's that about Saruman. There's that ivory tower sort of person who just influences people to do their bidding and enact evil stuff, because you see Saruman like influencing these like human tribes or whatever who have been wronged by the Rohan people, and how they're like, yeah, we have to go kill them, and
that was such a great scene,
and we'll shed our blood for you, and here's my palm with this open like slit. So you can really see like the influence of like historical aspects into the film. And also you could probably relate to Peter Jackson's like experimentation or freedom of expression when Legolas goes down that staircase on that fucking shield and he like shoots like 10 different orcs. And in the behind the scenes, which we watched of the films, Orlando Bloom himself said Tolkien probably rolled in his grave just because they took that liberty.
Yeah, it really is, it's probably the cheesiest take in all three films, but I absolutely love it. It's so, because it's this really grim battle scene, Helm's Deep, and there's like a little bit of like levity with this silly like he's snowboarding down the stairs. And what was interesting is when you and I, we watched the behind the scenes extended special edition footage, whatever.
26 hours.
Yeah. Initially they were gonna have just this actor do it, this random actor, not like a sun double. It's a straight up regular elf who was in the battle do it. But then Orlando Bloom stepped in, and he goes, I think this is a real moment where Legolas's like heroism can shine through, and it seems ludicrous. I mean, he has like a comeback with that kind of cheesy little take in the third film when he's sliding down
the Oliphant.
The trunk.
Yeah, you can see definitely Orlando Bloom's like 20-year-old, 21-year-old like persona coming through Legolas, because as we'll talk about later about book to film adaptations of characters, the Legolas in the films isn't exactly what you see in the books, but it's because Orlando Bloom's just this like adventurer, like bro kind of dude,
It's kind of good for the film, I think, because if you have like these three people, you have Gimli, you have Aragorn, you have Legolas. If there's only one of them who's very heroic, it kind of seems like the other two are sort of out of place. Yeah. So they all kind of have like their own kind of quirky
moments.
Yeah. So scenes and characters. So what was your favorite scene?
So it's kind of split again to two different moments. It's not even a scene, it's just two moments within a scene. So the first one is probably Helm's Deep, when the whole Helm's Deep scene is like
very awesome.
Yeah, half an hour long at least, and it's just like filled with awesome sort of moments, and as we talked about, those heroic sort of redemptions of characters and stuff. But I think my favorite, just aesthetically, is Gandalf coming at the dawn of the fifth day, I believe. And he appears on top of the hill, and he talks about how Theoden seems to be all alone, and then Éomer comes in and it's like, but he's not alone, or something like that. And they all just like charge down this like 90-degree slope, and the sun is shining behind them, and they're just like beautiful slow motion shot, and it's so dramatic, and it's just so beautiful and physical sort of representation of what hope looks like. And it's at the darkest moments that the light shines through kind of thing. My second favorite moment is when the Ents ride to war. It's like one of my favorite parts because I'm an environmentalist, so that scene really hit me. But specifically when Fangorn is like, this is us and we might not come back, but we are going to war. And then this like amazing music like just springs up. It's like kind of like elven, and they're just like stomping through past their dead fallen tree fellows, and they go to war with Saruman. So those are my two favorite moments.
So we just had a whole bunch of cuts because I had a lot of trouble explaining my end of this question. But now we're continuing. I really liked Helm's Deep as well. I thought it was the defining moment of the Two Towers. Great action. It was just a superb like scene. Loved it. Loved it. My favorite scene, though, it's a bit more dramatic, and there's a lot more emotional range that we're seeing in the characters, and it's just it's a very epic kind of scene, but it's very, like, it's not in the context of a battle or something that's very urgent or abrupt. It's King Theoden becoming uncorrupted. Like, he has like that kind of weird battle with Sauron, who's got like a hold of him, or not? It's Saruman, sorry.
Yeah.
I always confuse those two names when I was younger.
Me too.
Yeah,
all the time.
They just sound so similar, like I guess phonetically or something. But I love it. Really, the whole scene, like when Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, they ride up to Edoras, and they go to Meduseld, the hall on the top of the hill. And the thing that was remarkable was when we were watching the behind the scenes footage, that location is 100% real. That's all there. Like, they actually took that little hill. It's not a little hill, it's actually a pretty big hill.
Yeah, Mount Sunday.
Yeah. And they built the set on top of it, and there's no CGI, there's no green screen. Those mountains in the background, this beautiful landscape, is 100% real, which is really cool. Somewhere in the middle, nowhere in New Zealand, right? Like somewhere. But it's one of those things where I really love that they filmed it there, because I've never seen anywhere in the world that's like New Zealand. So it just makes everything seem so much more unique.
Definitely a tourist ad, the entire series for New Zealand.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
I love that scene though. It's right when Theoden kind of he fades from like that decrepit old version of himself when he's under the when he's like a thrall of Saruman, and he becomes who he is again, and he kind of like recognizes people, like, oh yeah, I was like a king like one time, like was the lord of this hall, and then Gandalf goes, perhaps you will remember your strength, or your fingers remember your strength if you grasped your sword. Yeah. So he pulls that amazingly crafted real sword out of the scabbard. Yeah. And then he has that moment of realization. Yeah, and of course you got the great score by who's the composer?
Howard Shore.
Yeah. Going in the background, and it just feels like here is a king coming out of a really bad place, and now he's back, and there's going to be some serious vengeance happening. Saruman's going to get his ass handed to him. And it was great because I feel like for anyone who's ever been down in the dumps and seized by something that's really like shitty, I love how that scene represents someone potentially like
recovering.
You can kind of identify with the way Theoden feels and the gravity of that moment. It's just really interesting.
And I really enjoyed in that scene even the shape of the sword. So it was something that I noticed really when I was younger, was that the horses made like a heart shape, like on the hilt, on the blade, and I just thought that was so beautiful, because it's like the subtle hint of, cheesy as this sounds, like love can conquer anything, because Theoden, he only gets through it because Gandalf is there to help him, and it's through like everyone in that hall being like supportive, well, except like Grima, and everyone who's in control in that hall is rooting for Theoden, and that's how he kind of gets better, and Eowyn is there to pick him up and stuff. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed that whole aspect of this very like masculine warrior sort of scene and culture that is the Rohan people.
Yeah. And the hall is beautiful.
Yeah,
The set hand built. I remember this is the previous behind the scenes tape that we looked at. It was the artists.
Yes.
And the concept artists for the film using so many different horse motifs.
Yes.
Like in the arches and the pillars, and it's on, it's in the armor of the soldiers.
Yeah.
And in like the soup and the smallest little detail.
Tapestries and
Yeah, it's everywhere. I mean, even like the throne that Theoden sitting on, the two chairs or the the two arms of the chair.
Yeah.
Are like horse heads, and it was hand carved. It's just.
And I didn't even notice this, but they mentioned that the stables were like almost as grand as Meduseld itself, because the Rohan people put so much value and like love and loyalty towards the horses, so the stables had to be like as grand as the Meduseld hall itself. And like looking back, it's like, yeah, like those are high ass pillars for a stable, and there's a lot of light coming in, and it's so beautifully constructed. And it goes again to say what we said last podcast, where all those little details that don't even register in the viewer's mind, they're like so important to make the world look realistic and for the cultures to really pop and shine.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the characters, so obviously we have kind of our running favorites that go across the three films, but who comes up in this film, The Two Towers, or the book even, you can go by that angle too.
Yeah. Well, my favorite character is Frodo, but he's taking a backseat in this one to Éowyn for sure. Obviously, you can tell by my voice that I'm a girl, so I'm naturally going to be like, yay, like a female, like power girl kind of thing. But I think that she's a very unique character, even if you don't like look at her gender, even though her gender is very much a part of who she is, because she's not just like this headstrong person who can do whatever they want. She is kind of caged by like what is expected of her in terms of like gender roles and being a shield maiden and all of that. So that is part of her sort of psyche and her development as a character for sure. I love her line where Aragorn basically asks her like, what do you fear? And she goes, a cage, and where she can't prove her valor or her bravery anymore. And that's a running theme, right, of like proving your loyalty and your bravery and your love for your countrymen. And she's scared that she'll never be able to like show her strength that way.
Yeah, and so, of course it's also it's worse to die having not fought.
Yes.
And to be like enslaved or like a captive.
Exactly.
And then you didn't die trying. There's an understanding that the pursuit of valor is a good thing.
Yeah.
And going into danger is necessary.
Yeah. And a brave and necessary act for sure.
And of course, like, it's so obvious, but, Tolkien having lived through two biggest conflicts in history, those are feelings that people like actually felt and experienced on a mass scale. And, inevitably it kind of plays out here on the screen when this whole nation have to go to war against this enemy that they've not long been neglecting to confront because their king was the thrall of the enemy himself.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course there's that douchebag Wormtongue who's he's really well cast in the film.
Yeah,
because the guy is just so creepy. Like he has the two different color contacts, and
he has no eyebrows.
He's just a slimy looking shitbag.
Yeah.
Really
he's like Snape's younger brother, basically.
It's so true. It's when I always kind of had it in the back of my mind, but I never thought the word Snape.
Yeah. He's totally a Snape.
Yeah, I mean, this whole episode's already been kind of like just a big nerdgasm, and so of course we brought Harry Potter into this episode.
Yeah, but going back to Éowyn, like even in the books, like I really admired her because she had such great lines, and they always hit me. And this is more towards the third book, but she talks about well, it's not really her dialogue, but it's about her and how she changes with the seasons. It seems like the sunlight shone upon her and she was changed. It was some kind of quote like that. I'll have it like memorized for the next episode of this podcast, but it was just really beautiful, and she always has like some sort of inner wisdom with her bravery, and I really enjoy and Miranda Otto is just like this beautiful lady, and she's so competent, and she really brings out the activeness of the Éowyn character.
Yeah.
Because Éowyn is such a fiery sort of spirit and is very active in who she is. She doesn't let things happen to her. And Otto really brings that out in her.
Yeah, I agree that she's extremely well cast. I made that remark in the last podcast that pretty much everybody in the Lord of the Rings films were just fantastically well cast. But she is one of the best in terms of having read the book. It's so her. Miranda Otto just brings it out.
Yeah. And she sings really nicely too. I like the funeral scene where they bury her cousin.
Good.
Yeah.
Another like cultural kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, they're supposed to be kind of like a Viking culture or Northern European and like a little bit of Celtic in there. So they do the burial mounds and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Very pastoral. So what's your favorite character?
Well, in the movie, I still like Gandalf the White.
Okay.
I mean, I like Gandalf the Grey.
Yeah.
Gandalf the White is just awesome. I liked Christopher Lee's performance as Saruman in this one. I mean, I liked it in the Fellowship of the Ring, obviously. But here, it's kind of like, this is who he really is. He's the bad guy. And Christopher Lee's really good at being bad guys. And he's got that voice, and he's just got that presence. And he really has like this menacing kind of quality to
He's very powerful seeming, even though he's just this like thin, tall man.
Very slight. You know. In the book, though, I really liked Éomer because Éomer is the consummate soldier doing his duty, has a strong sense of like, I gotta fight for my country, and it's because I have like a real reverence for soldiers and people in the military in real life, and so having like reading that in his character in the book, I really liked it. And he's unsure of what's going to happen. Of course they all are, but of course for him, he has what's known as the burden of command because he has to oversee a large contingent of his countrymen, and you know, there's a lot of lives that are at stake. And we read it in the book, and it's represented well in the film. And in both the book and the film, there's a really good representation of Éomer's exile from Rohan. He's only got a small company of loyal companions with him. And even though that experience has happened to him, he still has this like immense sense of duty and loyalty. And that no matter who is in charge of Rohan, it could be Saruman himself, I'm still going to fight for my Rohan, which is the Rohan of Theoden, the king, my uncle, and everyone that I love and know, that kind of thing. Yeah,
that's an interesting take because it's not just the soldier doing what they're trained to do or what the command tells them to do.
It's part of who he is.
Yeah, exactly.
It's his fiber, you know, because you get the sense, especially in the film, obviously, that it's a warrior society through and through. I mean, you know, they're probably like a pastoral people, and they live in small settlements, and they rely on horses a lot, their way of life. But these are people who pretty much all at some point go out and they, you know, take up arms, and they have to defend their country. And I haven't read it yet, but apparently in the Unfinished Tales, there's a bit of an elucidation on the military structure of Rohan, and so I'd love to read that. I haven't. No, don't spoil it for me.
I know a little bit.
Yeah, see, you've a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm so jonesing to read it. So overall, it's actually one of my like most favorite cultures in the whole Lord of the Rings universe. It's just really, at least like for a human culture, you know.
Definitely. And the music, I think, has a lot to do with it.
Yes.
Too. It's so distinctive and evocative and nostalgic, and it's sad, but it's also proud. It's like these humans are in the like last stretch of their bravery and valor, and they're trying to prove themselves, but they have a lot of self-doubt. Like you can all hear all of that in the music. It's like I don't know. But yeah, spoiler alert on the Unfinished Tales. I don't know if this is actually, it's probably mentioned in it actually, but there are more Éowyn's to come in those tales.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's all I'm gonna say.
Some Amazons.
Yeah. Some Xena princess warriors.
I do think though that we have to mention Frodo and Sam because they kind of have a really rough time in this book. I mean, the third book it gets way worse, but they're already having a really rough time in the Two Towers, and on screen they're pretty much surrounded by rocks always.
Yeah,
like they're just in the mountains somewhere, just kind of plodding along, getting closer and closer to Mordor. And of course, at this point, they're actually pretty close to Gondor. And of course, at one point, they actually get all the way to Ithilien, and then that's when they meet Faramir.
Captain Faramir.
Yeah. A chance to prove his quality. I love that line.
Yeah.
But in the behind the scenes footage, Sean Astin and
Andy Serkis plays Gollum.
Yes, and Elijah Wood.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I know all their names, but just on the fly, you can't always remember. They had some really arduous shoots, and there was a lot of on location shooting. Like there was this one scene where it's all like foggy and misty, and like they're actually in the mountains in the middle of fucking nowhere in New Zealand. Yeah. But of course, a lot of the other scenes they're on some set, wherever. Green screen, and then they have like those styrofoam rocks and all that kind of stuff, but like they're so well designed that they look real.
Yeah.
But it was funny because they've been recycled from previous scenes in this film and then the previous one. And so I think it was Elijah was commenting that they're like kind of being driven like fucking mad because they're just seeing rocks all day, every day. Like,
the same three faces.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
At least with like Aragorn and like Legolas and Gimli, like they have all these people that they meet.
They had such a funner time. Like, let's just be real. Yeah, they had a lot more fun than Frodo and Sam.
Yeah, and in the behind the scenes, Sean Astin he got his wig removed by Andy Serkis.
Oh my god.
Forcibly.
That was such a funny like moment.
Yeah, and it's when they try to go into the gates of Mordor, the Black Gate, and Gollum rips them back, but Andy Serkis was just like in a really intense mood and he yanked Sean Astin's wig off of him, which is glued to his like head, right? And it must have hurt. Yeah. But when we saw like the actual footage of that happening,
it was like
Sean Astin, he was just pissed off. He just stormed off, and it was just. And then Elijah Wood's just like, "Ooh, shit!" Yeah. And it's such a great moment because you just really realize like. Yeah, like all the actors say that it's a fun time and they get along really well, but you get these moments of just like utter frustration, right? When things like this happen and you get setbacks and you like, it's like a relationship, right? Like just because you're in a great relationship doesn't mean you have like a perfect time all the time. There's like these itty bitty like frustrations and stuff. Wink, wink.
I'm in the doghouse, aren't I? Yeah?
No, but like in all seriousness, like any relationship has those sort of darker moments, but it's how you channel that energy and how you communicate with the other person and just feeding off each other in a like film sort of space, like feeding off each other's sort of frustrations. And that's really where all the dark sort of moments come with them. And they have so many intense moments in the script and in the atmosphere around them. And it's just... Even watching it is hard for me. As soon as Frodo and Sam hit Emyn Muil and like meet Gollum, I'm like, can I just skip all of this now? I don't want to see Gollum. Yeah. He's a great cinematic creation, like amazing.
He's such a hateable character, and even like he reads as this incredibly annoying, deserving to die character.
Yeah, I still don't get what the whole pity thing is about with Bilbo. Like, I don't get, like, Gandalf is this, like, again, this kind of entity that sees the fate of, like, the world in a way that other people don't. So he's like, it's a good thing that Gollum is alive because he made sure that the ring at the end, spoiler alert, actually got into Mount Doom. But I feel like if he wasn't there, he wouldn't have pushed Frodo into such a bad state, and it might have been different. Anyway, but
and there is that element of symbolism that Tolkien's employing when he has the Gollum character. because I think if this was Game of Thrones, they would have met Gollum and Frodo would have stuck the sword in Gollum's face and been like, okay, that was fucking weird. Let's keep like plotting on Sam, like, because he really doesn't do anything. But of course, you know, he's the guide and he goes, you know, I'll slowly master to Mordor. Can't even do his voice. I don't even want to try.
No, he's just But I do appreciate how like he makes the journey interesting for both characters. It's very hard.
It's a lot more tense, obviously, because you know you have this this character you can't trust because he's obsessed with the ring, and he's obviously just gonna lead you there, and at some point he's gonna betray. And I don't remember. I feel like I recall, especially in the book, Sam is just so suspicious. And it's what represented well in the film of Gollum, because you know he sees that he's like this deranged like monster. Like he's not a hobbit anymore. He hasn't been a hobbit for a very long time, really.
He's a villain, just as Sam says all the time. And Frodo sees it, but he doesn't want to believe it, or he's trying to think for the greater good of himself, where he sees himself descending into a space like Gollum is occupying currently. But he also knows that Gollum is their only hope, which is tragic, right? That's like they have to rely on this like pitiful creature to get to where they need to go. Even though they have like a wizard like Gandalf behind them, like he can't help them. It's just this creature that they have to rely on, who like has practiced 500 years of deceit and ring mongering, basically. And that really goes to show that friendship and trust in other people, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that you that seems good. Sometimes it's just like in that situation, that's who you can trust. So speaking of people who are greedy for the ring.
Faramir.
Oh, Faramir.
Yeah. Well, at least at first. And then he sees what the ring causes and he's like, nope.
Fuck that. It's interesting how he's changed from the books, though, because I believe in the books he's pretty easily like rid of the ring. He's a bit more of a noble and stately and kind of perfect character in the books, where he's already like a lot more. Yeah, he's like a lord almost, and Denethor is jealous of how noble he is because he has that sort of Númenórean sort of aspect to him.
So I guess another character we also hate, just as an aside, is Denethor.
Lord Denethor, God. Ugh. So
asshole.
But in the films, he's a bit more flawed. So he has this streak to redeem himself in the eyes of this very problematic father figure who is his actual father. And he tries to run with that and make himself seem a bit more in control. He's kind of like Éomer in that respect, because he is another kind of lost general. He's not exiled, but he still has to defend this basically lost city of Osgiliath for his father, or just like Ithilien in general. And he has very little hope, but he still is fighting for his land and his people. Yeah,
he's definitely a badass. I remember reading that one scene in the book where Frodo, Sam, Gollum are like they're in Ithilien, and all of a sudden there's dudes who are firing arrows at this this passing army of Southron men, and then there's the Oliphants, and there's dudes dying, and it reads really nicely.
And Faramir is a bit more sensitive, I think, than in the books. I don't know if
I think in the books he does come off a little bit severe. That there's a part of him that is a little bit uncompromising, but I think that there's something in Faramir in the film where, even though he's a spurned child of Denethor, our favorite character, and he wants that chance to prove his quality.
Yeah, there you go.
He doesn't want to be corrupted by the ring, and he kind of sees through this illusion of, I'll become powerful and I'll become like loved by my father, and he'll love me more than Boromir, and that kind of thing. You get the sense that he's actually like thinking these things, but he realizes that it's all a trap. He actually sees past like, oh, this is an incredible weapon that we can. the nukes, man.
Yeah.
The ring are the nukes.
Yeah.
You know, this is an incredible evil. This whole conflict is over this stupid ass ring.
Yeah.
And it has to be destroyed. So I'm not going to hinder Frodo and Sam and Gollum in their journey. That in itself was where he proved his quality. And I think later on Gandalf, or who says it?
Sam.
Sam says, yeah.
No,
but Faramir, you prove your quality.
Yeah. Very, very high indeed, or something like
with
that.
His Irish accent.
Yeah. And I think, I was going to say Amor. Faramir's story arc is very powerful because he does, again, have that relatable sort of like he wants to prove himself to his father. He's kind of coming of age. I feel like he's already come of age, but his father still hasn't seen him do that. So he wants to do something that's going to make his father see.
Yeah, he just wants approval. It's just all.
Yeah, exactly. The nobility that he kind of represents as opposed to Denethor, who's just very headstrong. Faramir kind of questions everything that he's given. And in the book, he has this very important line where he says, I do not love the arrow for its sharpness and the sword for its beauty or something like that. I only love that which it defends. And a lot of people kind of question the fact that it wasn't put into the film because obviously depicting war is another way of glorifying war. And that's apparently what Peter Jackson is doing by having Legolas like skateboarding down the friggin' steps at Helm's Deep. But I think Faramir does this like really cool scene in Ithilien where he looks at this man that he or his companions shot, Haradrim, Oliphant Rider, and
he's got that hood on. He's just kind of like it's a very funny shot.
Yeah, but he asks
wonder
these.
What he was fighting
yeah,
for.
Exactly. Those rhetorical questions where he's like, did he have a family? Does he love his country? And like all these questions, and you kind of like think like, oh yeah, like this is kind of shitty, and it's basically the same theme behind that like beautiful quote that he talks about weaponry for. And I think that quote like works well for a book where it's very imagistic. You don't need to describe like the sharpness of an arrow in a film scene. Like, having that
it's a little like a poetic kind of
exactly.
kind of line. Like,
exactly.
I think that Peter Jackson actually he did take advantage of having that moment. War is some bad shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you know, he's looking at this dead kid essentially, like this young man who's shot up with arrows. Yeah, you know, like I wonder, like this kid probably had the same sense of duty that I have.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
What was he fighting for?
Yeah.
Why did this have to happen? So he has that moment, but it's not sappy, and it's not it's not really cheesy.
Exactly.
I think that it was written quite well into
it flowed well because I think that quote is very esoteric, and it would just made everything a lot longer than it should have been. But yeah, anyway, I think the way that they rendered Faramir is very different from the books, even just in the way that he looks like a secondary Aragorn. Basically, he has like gray eyes and darker hair, I think. But yeah, they made him a separate character, and I think it's good. I think Tolkien might have been happy with him. And speaking of further changes that Tolkien might have liked, maybe, let's talk about Arwen. So
yeah.
She is a very minor character in the books, but in the films, she is kind of given a bit more of a presence, if not by like physical sense, more of like a psychological presence for Aragorn specifically. So she shows up in his mind and in visions, and I thought those were like real-time visions, but apparently those are just like flashbacks of Aragorn's memory of like when they were like making out in the past. I thought it was kind of like she was like telepathically like reaching
I thought that too the first time that I watched the film.
Right? Yeah. But an interesting thing that we also found out, and it's kind of like well known, was that Arwen was going to be at the Battle of Helm's Deep fighting with the Lothlorien elves alongside Haldir. Like Liv Tyler, who plays Arwen, was on set and like fighting, and she had to go through sword training and all this, and then they finally decided like, no, this is not gonna work out.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they didn't do that. It would have been very strange.
Very bizarre, because like, Arwen could be a great fighter. Like she's been alive for like so long. Like, hey, why not? Like she could pick up some sword fighting skills here and there. But I think just in terms of like who she is and who she represents, I think it was a good call to take that part out. It shows a different side of like feminine strength, a supportive role, or someone who's a bit more sensitive or something like that, and someone who doesn't exactly replicate Éowyn, because if you think about like why Aragorn loves Arwen and perhaps not Éowyn, it's because she has this like otherworldly sense to her, and she's not exactly a very physical person, Arwen. She's a bit more like psychological or mental, which is why, yeah, exactly, which is why it's a good portrayal of their relationship, that she comes through the flashbacks to Aragorn, and that's how we kind of see her. You could say that it's like a passive way to view her, and like, it's all like a man's fantasy of a woman kind of thing, but I think it's a bit of a because I've actually heard an interviewer asking Liv Tyler, so how are you taking it up that you're like object of fantasy for every like nerd guy out there? And she's like, I don't really like that. And then she brushed
I have
it
like
off.
enough self-esteem to not think of myself like that.
And it's just kind of like, oh my god, guys,
I got
like,
to be in an amazing movie.
yeah,
made lots of money.
Yeah, and
my dad's a rock star.
Yeah.
Dudes are thinking about me in creepy ways. I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. Fucking hate the way interviewers like speak to actresses.
They ask such just grating, stupid questions sometimes.
And it really like reflects.
I know what they're trying to get at. They're trying to get like some sort of angle and like trying to unearth that there's something there that's uncomfortable.
I think it just reflects like how society sees like womanhood or femininity, and how just because you're not on the battlefield doesn't mean that you're just all
you're not fragile.
Yeah, and you're not like an object of desire because you're like passive and you're just waiting around or something. She's dying, she's waning because of her immortal power is leaving her. Like that's just Tolkien's portrayal of their love, that she like gives up her immortality to be with Aragorn. And that's like its own form of bravery, because she's gonna stand for what she wants, right? And she wants him, and that should be respected, and not be like, oh, haha, she's such a like hot elf. Like she is, but like that's not the point, guys.
Yeah, it's part of the point, but you know.
Yeah, she is Tolkien's Edith, right? That's his wife. There we go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you don't know, Tolkien kind of structured the whole tale of Beren and Luthien after his romance with his wife, Edith.
No way, yeah. Beren and Luthien being from the Silmarillion.
Yes.
Right?
So they're the structure for which Arwen and Aragorn's like love tale mimics, because mortal man and mortal elf maiden, they meet each other in the forest and they like fall in love, and there's like this forbidden love kind of thing. And Tolkien met Edith when they were really young. I'm not sure if they might have been like foster siblings or something, or like they live very close to each other, and they used to play in the same fields and forests and stuff, and he used to like play in the forest with her, and like he'd see her running, and you can see that sort of imagery in the elf maiden running in the forest, and the elf or the human man just being like, ooh, look at that catch. You know, so I think it's to respect Arwen is to respect Tolkien and his love for Edith. And actually on their gravestone, I think, like, they're buried right beside each other, and on their gravestone, I think it says, like, Beren and Luthien or something, which is really cute.
Isn't that just adorable?
Yes.
Okay, so now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, the question of the hour.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun,
So
dun.
I'm just going to read it out because you wrote it very nicely. Why do you think they changed the death of Saruman? Is he Hitler? It's like, you go from a really nice technical question like about how things were written, and then was this dude Hitler?
Yeah, was he literally Hitler?
Conceptually, is he Adolf Hitler?
Yeah.
So I mean, I kind of talked about it at the beginning about what I think. It's hard to say that he is reading the book. Mm-hmm. This is why, because he lives.
Yeah.
Until the third, and then he gets shot up by hobbits and dies.
Yeah, the militia hobbit.
The second, in the Two Towers of the book, you don't really, that whole scene where the Ents are just rampaging through Isengard, destroying it. That doesn't actually really talked a whole lot in the book. like it's implied that it happens. Like there's definitely like a description of the aftermath. But he's holed up in his little tower, the Orthanc Tower, and I think the films did the right thing because for cinematic reasons they couldn't really have it where, the hobbits destroy the ring, and then this asshole Saruman is still he's still out in the world somewhere, and of course he musters up a bunch of brigands and wild men to help go to the Shire and try to take it over.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have made sense to show that on screen.
Yeah.
And really, it was one of my least favorite moments in the books as well, because it feels like there's this great catharsis. And I'm sure we'll talk about this when we do the Return of the King. And it just feels like, maybe they should have just like got rid of Saruman.
Yeah.
Right when they could have, what I mean? Instead of just letting him go like some tramp.
Yeah.
Like he was obviously a big enough of a threat that you have to get rid of him.
Yeah.
And then, he comes back and he's menacing and hobbits have died.
Yeah.
And the Shire's been kind of defiled a little bit. Obviously it ends all fine and dandy because he does get shot full of arrows and whatnot. And all of his brigands either they're killed or they run off or whatever. Reading it from the book, it's kind of hard to get that impression that this is kind of a subconscious way of Tolkien representing Adolf Hitler or the power of one man's charisma and speech in articulating a message of destruction and hatred and of wanting to go to war for this grand racial narrative, which is like master race taking over what's rightfully theirs and exerting like their dominion over the lesser peoples of the world, that kind of thing, to the point of like genocide and total war.
Yeah.
So Saruman is incredibly callous of the amount of lives and resources that he's spending for his own pursuits of power. So there's been a lot of discussion among historians as to the mental health of Adolf Hitler when he was alive, and whether or not he was like a psychopath or a sociopath, and how he viewed the lives of his men, and how he viewed human life in general, like what its worth was. And I like to think that I'm well educated on this particular topic, but like from what I've read, there's just so many differing opinions. Some people say that Hitler was not at all psychopathic, and some say he was completely and utterly fucking nuts.
Yeah.
And, he had absolutely no regard for human life whatsoever, which is why it was so easy to just send millions of young men to their deaths and make horrendous mistakes. Because, of course, Hitler was not just a statesman. He was actually a commander-in-chief of the German military. And and especially towards the end of the war, he was overriding a lot of the decisions and advice from his generals. And at that point, they were on too many fronts, and they had lost too many important strategic battles, and morale was declining. And there was this great offensive by the Soviets, and of course by Americans, and North Africa was just like a disastrous campaign for Nazi Germany. So it all kind of goes to shit. And and it kind of all goes to shit for Saruman as well. Yeah. But I'm just not seeing the kind of cultish, pagan, racial, nationalistic narrative. I mean, it isn't. There's not really any placeholders for that kind of stuff in the book, like from what I've read.
Earth, yeah.
It's just not really there. I mean, he's a wizard gone bad. He's power hungry. He's corrupted by the power of the ring. Like he wants it. He wants to supplant Sauron, who's he's pretending to be like his puppet, but really in the end, of course, Sauron has the last laugh, I guess, so to speak, because Saruman fucks up royally, and Isengard's destroyed, and then here he is thrown out on his ass on the road, and he has to go and trick some Dunlanders and crazy wild men into going to the Shire to take over.
I just looked it up how he died. He was actually still killed by Grima Wormtongue, but he had taken over Bag End in Frodo's absence, and he had
I forgot that.
Yeah, and he had taken over the house, and then he had taken Grima over the edge in terms of like how shitty he is to him, and he just killed him there. And that's just how he dies. But yeah, I think it's interesting just narratologically how at the end Saruman comes back and threatens.
Big words.
Lit major here. How Saruman comes back in the end, and when you think of a narrative or a novel where there's a denouement, which is the end sort of sequence, there has to be something that happens at the end, where it's not just like, okay, and this happens, and then like the end. Like with a sweeping epic, it still has to, like, there has to be some sort of emotion or tension or at the end as well. Because since the book and the film don't end with them dropping the ring into the Mount Doom, they have to have something else happen. Otherwise, it's just like... Yeah, you're just going to end and it's going to just fall flat, which is why there's so many endings in the last, like, film. We're going to talk about it, but there's at least 8 fade outs and fade back ins where they could have just ended the movie, and that's, like, still building that tension and that bittersweetness. So in the book, I can kind of see why Tolkien, like, keeps that in there, because he's kind of saying, like, oh, just because the ring is gone doesn't mean, like, evil is gone forever from Middle-earth. And in the film, I can understand why they had him die exactly in the middle point of the story, because Saruman doesn't play any part of the ring story afterwards, or an Aragorn story after the death or like the taking over Orthanc.
Yeah.
So him being dead doesn't change anything at all. So I see why that would work. And I think it kind of mimics that sort of Hitler figure, that he is murdered by someone who is close to him, and then he falls from this high, like his quote-unquote ivory tower, right? Close to him, like he is part of his, like he's not an enemy, like Grima's not an enemy, right?
Oh, right. Oh, I thought you meant like no, because Hitler was not killed by anybody.
No. He committed suicide. Yeah. But if you
many times tried to kill him. There were many assassination attempts.
Yeah. It's someone who is physically close to him, or is him. Basically someone internal in his campaign. It ends everything. It ends Saruman. It ends like the Nazi reign kind of thing. So I understand why he fell from the tower in such a way, because it's like he looked down on human life and like just even orc life or any sort of organism from this high tower. And so he falls to his death, and he sees the value of life at the end, I guess, because he hits the ground and he sees what reality is.
You know, Hitler did end his days rather pathetically. He was in the Führer bunker,
married to his cousin.
Yeah, I know. The dude was really fucked up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were some rumors about like their relationship, and I won't get into it, but he died like in a really low place. And actually like underground, you know.
Yeah. True. Interesting.
But going back to like his mental state briefly, I actually didn't know anything about this until relatively recently, in fact. And I of course have like looked into World War II and studied it, and like I've been like really fascinated by it for many years. But Hitler was on a ton of different drugs, like drugs that today are like street drugs. You can't. Like I think he was on barbiturates and like a version of methamphetamine, and of course German soldiers were issued methamphetamine like pills. So there's this interesting scholarship about how them being all drugged up and whatnot led them to be more. How do you say? It's late, folks. It was easier for them to commit atrocities and to keep on fighting, like, to the death.
Berserkers, just like in the Urukai ranks. They're just people who just fucking just kill people, like, left and right. And you'd have to be on drugs or, like, some sort of... like crazy shit to do.
I remember in the extended edition, they said that what the berserkers do is they smear human blood on their face or something, and it runs down like all over
their backs or something.
Yeah, and then that causes them to go into that frenzy.
Yes. Yeah,
you know, like it's kind of like the equivalent of the Vikings at the mushrooms, and you know, then they become
Hitler and his crew.
Whoa.
Damn.
Vikings, Nazis, and Urukai berserkers.
Oh god.
The universe is a strange place, folks. So.
Yeah. Oh, Tolkien must just be like, stop making all these illusions. Sorry.
There is no allegory.
Yeah, there you go. So, what do you think? Is Saruman Hitler?
I don't know. I don't really see it. I didn't really read it in the books that this is a Hitler character. If anything, I think that Sauron would be like the more likely candidate. But even still, there's just so many things that we're kind of missing that don't really fit into the World War II, allegory that people are, I think, that are looking for.
Yes, yeah.
There's something to be said about taking our contemporary understandings of this past event and against Tolkien's understandings as a guy who lived through that period and saw what was happening, and then kind of putting our own kind of weird interpretations on it to fit our current political and social and societal narratives or what have you, and our own understandings of the history. So my uncomplicated answer is no, but I definitely think that it's something that is an interesting question, if anything, and I've probably said that about 10,000 times this podcast.
I think it's a bit of like a chicken and the egg sort of story going on here because, so if we look at Saruman, and Hitler, they're all men who didn't really fight in their own wars.
Great mustaches.
Yeah. We never see Sauron's.
I always thought the Hitler mustache was really stupid. It's just, it's
ridiculous
looking. It's
looking.
incomplete.
Yeah. And he's dark haired and he's like, blonde people are the best, yo. God. Just putting it out there. Anyway, so Saruman,
he
Hitler.
Actually said that in that tone of voice, verbatim.
So Saruman, Hitler, and Sauron are all three people who don't really fight in their own wars. Like they never are lead in command like Aragorn or Faramir or Éomer. Yeah. So they all kind of represent the same sort of evil where they let other people do the brave acts or the loyal acts or fighting for what they believe is right. And I think that's just a narrative that you can see in all sorts of stories and all sorts of cultures everywhere. So I don't think it's really fair to say Saruman is based off of Hitler. I think, and this actually kind of relates to something that my grade 10 English teacher told the class, was that every book after the Second World War was based off of the Second World War, if it has anything to do with good versus evil. And it's like, no, not really. Like, it doesn't have to. It's just Nazi Germany just kind of epitomizes the idea of like pure absolute evil that we all have to fight against. So I think it's, again, like chicken and the egg, which came first kind of thing. Like, was it Nazi Germany or was it absolute evil? Like, it's just a circle that kind of comes back and goes away and comes back again.
When you phrase it like that, it's pretty obvious that, well, no, absolute evil is just something that's always existed, and then there's just these manifestations of it. There was this really pertinent point that was made in the behind the scenes footage that in the interwar period, I believe, there was a whole bunch of medievalists and medieval literature that was revived because people were having to go and find narratives of valor and of courage and of self-sacrifice and whatnot, because at that point in history, like kind of like before World War One, it was, I think that a lot of people felt that, like, we don't have to go to war anymore, and of course it was all disproven to be dead wrong, and they had the biggest, stupidest, most destructive war up to that point in recent memory, I suppose. There was a whole bunch of wars that were raging in Europe in the 19th century, but
around the world.
I guess there was just this assumption that it was kind of all over. And of course they have World War One, which is just totally horrific, and then there's the 1920s and the 1930s, and there's the Great Depression, and before you know it, 1939, Hitler invades Poland, and then it's like, oh, okay, all over again.
Yeah.
And worse.
Yeah.
At least in terms of casualty numbers and the scale of destruction. So people need to have narratives, and despite the fact that many people hate history, and I love history, many people find history to be very boring, but I think that in times of desperation and when things are going definitely south in society, people will look to previous times to figure out what happened, because we do need examples, and we have to look at models of how people behaved, and we have to find points of reference for ourselves. If I could explain that any more long-windedly.
It's okay. Tolkien would have approved. But even Tolkien himself he was an Anglo-Saxonist, and he he translated a version of Beowulf, which today people don't really read because apparently it's too flowery or some shit.
I liked it.
Yeah. Do you have a copy of it?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, sick. That's
Yeah.
amazing. But yeah, so Tolkien revived Beowulf, and a whole bunch of people did. And before that, magic and fantasy and medievalist sort of literature wasn't really looked upon as anything fancy. And especially with Tolkien and his like essays on fairy stories and stuff like that, and him talking about the power of fairy stories and for adults, not just children, which is kind of like a revolutionary sort of concept. I think that's very a powerful sort of thing to tap into when you see so much modernization and things moving so fast in such an unprecedented rate. You kind of have to look back at old sort of narratives or narratives of supernatural beings to kind of like make sense of everything that's happening. And I think that's why Lord of the Rings is still such a relevant topic, and how modernity kind of has to be reined in by creatures like the Ents in tales like these. So yeah, that's our whole rant about history and Hitler and modernism there for you, and Beowulf.
Okay. Anyway, we're going to wrap things up because we've been talking for quite some time. So on that note, that has been The Two Towers.
Yeah.
The middle child of the Lord of the Rings series. So we're going to wrap it up with the epic conclusion. Return of the King. See you later, folks.
Bye.